80s was a time of many iconic moments, economic changes, political tensions, breakthroughs in technology, and memorable fads and trends. We'll take you back in time to what is known today as the Greed Decade, where consumerism boomed, greatest hits were born, and a new discovery changed the way we view AIDS forever.
On March 30, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot in an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr. As he made his way into his limousine after a press conference at the Washington Hilton Hotel, he was unaware at first that he was shot until he was shoved into a limousine by a Secret Service agent. Fortunately, he survived, but some of his staff members were injured. Hinckley was later found guilty and pled insanity.
We're reminded of the many traditions of openness and democracy that have marked the history of this city. America missed me.
On July 29th of 1981, over 17 million American citizens tuned in to watch the royal wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. This highly anticipated event was one of the most watched television events of the decade, making it a global phenomenon. On June 18th of 1983, Sally Ride, the first ever American woman, was sent to space on the shuttle called Challenger. This was a huge step in opening doors for future women to pursue a career in space exploration, as NASA began recruiting more women and served as an inspiration for little girls. On January 28, 1986, the space shuttle called Challenger experienced a technical failure that caused a gas leak, therefore setting the shuttle on fire and exploding during the middle of the journey. All of the 8 astronauts on the ride were immediately killed. On March 24, 1989, an oil tanker called the Exxon Valdez exploded during its course to Long Beach, California.
One of America's most magnificent waterways is blackened and befouled tonight by the biggest oil spill in American history,
which spilled more than 11 million gallons of crude oil into the Prince William Sound in Alaska. It took around 3 years for the spill to fully clean up.
We are Americans.
Like many Americans, Reagan feared the spread of communism. His administration was eager to send military troops to help fight in battle against communist countries. Although coming out with a mixed track record and review, a majority still believed in the conservative agenda throughout the 80s. Reagan left office with a high presidential approval rating. The quick spread of the New Rise movement was most likely due to the growing population in the suburban and rural areas of California, the Southeast, and the Southwest, known as the Sun Belt region. This boom was after World War II in the late 70s. As more of the population rises in the Sun Belt, more problems arise such as crime rates, overcrowding population, more homeless people, and inflation. The New Rights movement was formed in the early 80s. It appealed to a wide variety of Americans, including evangelical Christians, anti-tax protesters, advocates of deregulation in smaller markets, advocates of a powerful American presence in foreign countries, unaffected white liberals, and defenders of an unrestricted free market. In the election of 1980, many of the New Right advocates were voting for Ronald Reagan, a Republican. Reagan's acting past gave him a charming, outwardly reassuring manner that was appealing to many Americans. Reagan's campaign went after many economic issues. He advocated for tax cuts and believed it would encourage them to buy more goods and invest in businesses.
Where our productivity is up, so is our manufacturing product up. There is no runaway inflation as there has been in the past. So, as I say, I don't think anyone should panic.
Between 1973 and 1980, over 4 million jobs disappeared in the United States when American companies moved their operations outside the country. New York City alone lost 40,000 to 50,000 jobs in the apparel and textile industries. The amount of U.S.-based industries were also sinking. The Reagan administration terminated the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act program, a successful job training program that had been funded in 1982 at $3.1 billion. He also eliminated $2 billion from the federal food stamps program, reduced federal support for child nutrition programs by $1.7 billion over a 2-year period, and closed down the neighborhood self-help and planning assistance programs, which provided technical and financial help to inner cities.
This beautiful day started with trouble in Lower Manhattan. More than 100 people were arrested during a protest. Demonstrators were demanding more money in the war against AIDS. They brought rush hour traffic to a standstill. Tim Minton has details.
In 1982, over 30% of the total black labor force was jobless at some period during the year. Congress reduced federal assistance programs by 20% and cut federal assistance to state and municipal governments. In the beginning of the 1980s, there was a strong white backlash against the civil rights movement. A resurgence in racial violence occurred.
God bless America! Keep Forsyth County white!
The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups initiated national campaigns of terror, such as drive-by shootings of African Americans, firebombing of black churches in residential areas. Neighborhoods of major cities have become desperately poor, including Chicago's South Side, East New York and Brooklyn, the South Bronx, South Central Los Angeles, East Oakland, and nearby of all of Detroit. In such inner city communities, businesses of nearly every type largely disappeared.
During this time, people were deadly afraid that they would get AIDS because of how unknown of a virus it was and that they didn't understand clearly how it was transferred. It was discovered in the 1980s that AIDS, a very new virus in the US, could only be transmitted through bodily fluids, which calmed down the mass panic that was quickly spreading. That was only one of the biggest discoveries of this era. The hepatitis B vaccine was also produced along with insulin, and with the extra research into curing diabetes, glucometers were improved, and the 1970s insulin pump became more common in use for those with this condition. Other developments that have been made in this period include the first functioning implantable cardioverter defibrillator, which was first implanted February 1980 at Johns Hopkins Hospital. This has been instrumental in increasing the survival rate up to 70%. Intra-articular arthroscopic shavers were able to remove tissue from patients and reshape their anatomy. Cochlear implants were able to give hearing back to those who had gone deaf. Safety needles and syringes have been greatly improved, as it used to be the cause for many infections, and synthetic skin could be grown in labs and used as a replacement for those with burnt skin or skin diseases.
This is it. The drug so powerful it will empty the money from your pockets, make you sell the watch off your wrist, the clothes off your back.
Or kill your mother.
A rock type of cocaine called crack, a new addictive product, was introduced into inner-city neighborhoods which targeted poor African American communities. Since crack was very inexpensive, readily available, and highly addictive, several 100,000 of African Americans had become addicted to crack, and relatively few drug treatment centers were available. Some young people saw selling drugs as the only way to make a decent income at home. Violence, once relatively rare in black working-class communities, increased significantly.
Lighter, keep them down. Hannah. Now, give me a beat. Hey, hey.
Exercise gear that women and men wore to aerobics classes was soon seen on the street as well. New fabrics were comfortable, breathable knits, cotton fleece, and shimmering spandex that hugged the skin, showing off newly formed arm muscles and lean legs. Fabrics were used in everything from stirrup pants, leggings, tights, tank tops, midriff-bearing tops, bicycle shorts, and jogging suits. One-piece bodysuits or other body-hugging items were layered in loose sweatshirts or t-shirts ripped to reveal the shoulder, as seen in the 1983 movie Flashdance. Many men dressed in what was called a preppy style. This style of clothes reflected the conservative values and the importance of appearing to be wealthy that many sought in the decade. Classically styled jeans, khakis, and long shorts. Men sported the typical preppy shirt, the polo shirt, also known as the tennis shirt, with 3-button placket, ribbed collar, and a small logo. The big hair of the 80s was a symbol of the whole decade. Those huge permed hairstyles required a lot of hairspray, especially Aquanet, which couldn't have been good for the environment. Mullets were also very common. Jelly shoes had a light and airy material that avoided sweaty feet. Shoulder pads were often seen on TV worn by powerful women but were difficult to wear in real life. Leather jackets, denim jackets, and aviator jackets were trending throughout the 80s, sometimes simultaneously. Parachute pants were often worn by breakdancers to move easier. Leg warmers were a part of such ensembles, though they probably weren't very comfortable. Fashion cautious youngsters would either buy jeans with an acid wash effect or try to bleach their current pair for those white streaks. If there were rips at the knees, the jeans would be even more in keeping with the 80s fashion.
The Rubik's Cube was invented in the 1970s by Erno Rubik. Some spent hours, if not days, rearranging the cube in dozens of the more than 43 quintillion possible positions other than the one correct position before achieving success or giving up altogether. Contests with lubricated cubes were held around the world to see who could solve it in the fastest time. In 1982, in a world championship contest in Budapest, Hungary, a high school student from Los Angeles solved the puzzle in 22.95 seconds. Exercise became the new pastime for both men and women in the 1980s. Some jogged, continuing the trend from the 1970s, while many others joined health spas or clubs. Some were offered personal trainers, aerobics classes, racquetball courts, squash courts, swimming pools, steam rooms, saunas, and masseurs and masseuses. Health clubs seemed nearly to replace singles bars as prime places to meet members of the opposite sex. Aerobic dance classes and surgical changes became common during this time as women focused more and put more effort into their appearance. WWF was very popular at the time, with body slams and elbow drops being showcased across America. This was when WrestleMania was established. The Miracle on Ice was the moment when the underdog team from America beat the experienced Soviet hockey team. Pac-Man was the most popular and iconic trend of this decade. Micro Machines, Cabbage Patch Kids, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Care Bears, and Masters of the Universe were also very popular during this time.
Lennon was shot and killed at about 11 o'clock last night outside his apartment building. News of the Lennon shooting, of course, spread quickly around the world. NBC News correspondent Stephen Frazier tells what happened last night on Manhattan's West Side.
The decade started off with Beatles fans coming together to mourn John Lennon's death when he was tragically murdered by David Chapman right outside the musician's New York apartment. Baywatch was another iconic movie of this time, as well as Indiana Jones, which jump-started Harrison Ford's acting career, making him one of the biggest action stars of the decade. The fourth and fifth installment of the highly anticipated Star Wars franchise were also released with big numbers at the box office. Classics like The Breakfast Club and other Brat Pack movies were also a major hit when it was first released into theaters during this time. The first installment of the Batman series, as well as Top Gun, Die Hard, and Terminator, were all filmed and released within the 80s decade, setting foot for a future of many sequels that would later follow. Other notable movies of this time include Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beetlejuice, Willow, Stand By Me, The Goonies, Predators, and Gremlins.